the stent, the event rates are more. So whenever possible, you go to the minimum standard area. So that is always when in this case especially we wanted to have that is if patient was negative, then we would have been much more happy to send him.
It's a wonderful demonstration of how to manage a tandem lesion. It's always confusing.
That's the concept of functional syntax, right? You change the syntax more based on FFR.
Yeah.
Will you make me some water, Bilbo?
I don't think makes a difference because the FFR value, even if it's 0.75 to point, like Phil said, is basically point. It's that all the initial studies differ was at 0.75. So if it's in my practice, it's more than 0.8. I wouldn't worry about it because the signature of a lesion coming back is 1% if you defer it, whereas to 3% if you do a stent for
something. Yeah.
So I wouldn't do that. I would just choose the shortest stent like you.
I will these days. Maybe I can do something. Do that then.
Kannan, you are muted.
Again, nice demonstration, good learning. So can you go on to the next case? So the next case is on FFR in bifurcation. To present this, we have Dr. Rajesh Muralidharan. Rajesh Muralidharan is a consultant interventional cardiologist at Calicut, Kerala. He has more than 10 plus years of experience in cardiology. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Deepak, sir, for this.
Not yet, yeah.
Not yet.
Is it visible, sir, now?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Deepak, sir, for this opportunity. I must confess here that Deepak, sir, has asked me to speak on a topic in which we are actually quite skeptical to do a FFR in the recent few years after the emergence of new data with regards to FFR in bifurcation lesions. But he wanted some discussion and probably a few cases. So I just selected one and probably some background theory of why we are skeptical about doing an FFR in a bifurcation lesion. Probably of all the data that we have, all the good things about FFR, bifurcation lesions is one subset where we need to be a bit skeptical when using FFR. Now, this is a 54-year-old man who presented with effort angina of class 3, and this angiogram was done in June of 2012, and he had this bifurcation lesion with both the side branch as well as the vein vessels almost of the same size. There was some, we thought that the circumflex is having a tighter lesion. The proximal OM, osteoproximal OM is probably having 50 to 60% disease. And as we are all trained and taught, you try to get away with one stent. So we tried to put one stent into the main branch, which we thought is the circumflex, main circumflex, and then post-dilated it. And then we got this picture of a pinched obtuse marginal ostium with no significant disease distally. So at this point of time, we were quite aggressive with the FFR, even with regards to bifurcation lesions as well. So we did an FFR to this, and the FFR value at that time was 0.74. And so the OM lesion, which is almost of the same size as that of the main branch, we then tackled with a TN protrusion technique, and this was the final result. He had a stress perfusion scan around 3 months back, and that shows no inducible ischemia. That's around approximately 7 years down the lane. Now, I'm not sure whether we would have done this at this point of time, because we need to understand the data with regards to assessment or interpretation of an FFR value in a bifurcation lesion. Now, we have always been trained and taught that 1 is better than 2 in a bifurcation lesion, as elegantly shown in this meta-analysis, the largest meta-analysis of bifurcation lesions of 9 studies, which shows that there is a 31% relative risk reduction with regards to a provisional stent strategy rather than a planned upfront 2 stent strategy. But the billion-dollar question is which patient should receive one stent and which patient should receive two stents. And these the very same studies that tell us that you should use one stent are also divided with regards to the selection criteria for using two stents. As you can see, these are the major of the bifurcation studies: the Nordic, the BBB, the Cactus, as well as the BBC1. All of them having different criteria for stenting the side branch, and so they leave us confused about whether we use a single stent or two stents with regards to a bifurcation lesion. Now, FFR walked into this vacuum with the bulk of evidence, overwhelming evidence that it had with regards to stable lesions with the FAME as well as the DEFER series of trials. We thought that the FFR would be the game changer in this subset as well. Now, let us see the clinical scenarios where FFR and bifurcation may be useful. In a pre-intervention to assess the side branch, it may be used just like in any other coronary lesion. But we need to understand that if you are using an FFR wire in a side branch, always do a pullback across the main branch in bifurcation lesions. As can be seen from this frozen frame, there is a 50-60% lesion in the diagonal, and there is probably a lesion in the LAD. And somebody put a wire into the LAD, into the diagonal, and the lesion was 0.73. And suppose we had accepted this value without a pullback, we would have kept this patient on medical treatment. And now you do a pullback and you find that the largest step up is not at the diagonal ostium, but at the left main, where there is a gradient of approximately 20. That means that the tightest point, or the value, or the point that contributes to the value of 0.73 is at the left main bifurcation and not at the diagonal ostium. The same can be confirmed by an LAD pullback also, and this patient received a stent from diagonal into the LAD and no stent into the diagonal. So it is always important to do a pullback across the main branch in case of bifurcation lesions while you are assessing the side branch. The second point where we would think that FFR is most useful is after a main branch stent evaluation. Now, after the main branch stent, like in our case, like in the case that we had shown, the ostium of the side branch gets pinched, and we are not sure whether we should leave it alone or whether we should put a stent. And this has been known since ages. In the first of the studies that looked at the correlation between the angiography and FFR in 2005 by Ku's group, it's found that none of the lesions which had a stenosis less than 75% by angiography had a FFR of less than 0.75. And only 27% of lesions which had a diameter stenosis of more than 0.8, which had a diameter stenosis of 75% or more, had an FFR lesion of more than less than 0.75. The best cutoff value to predict an FFR value of 0.75 in a bifurcation lesion was around 80% of angiographic stenosis. That's why we have been using this criteria of 75% angiographic stenosis and a cutoff value that's a shade lower compared to the routine FFR value of 0.80 with regards to bifurcation lesions. In the more later of the studies, this has been amply reproduced, and this is by the Ham et al. Group, which again shows that the mismatch as well as the reverse mismatch is quite common between the ostium of the angiographic stenosis, and angiographic severity doesn't reflect into functional severity. So we think that FFR would be useful in this group, and it probably fares better compared to that of the IVUS, where again the correlation between any of the IVUS parameters is at best modest for assessing the hemodynamic severity of a post-ill side branch stenosis. Now let us look at the few practical tips for fractional flow reserve measurement in a side branch. It's better that you do not jail the pressure wire. There was a discussion earlier, but I personally will never jail a pressure wire, and I have learned from experiences, and I think Dr. Deepak could swear by that he has shown in nightmares where the jail side branch, we had find difficulty to pull out the wire. Options wire is an optical fiber system and not a piezoelectric system, so the properties are different, and it may not be prudent to extrapolate it to the presently wires available to us. Adequate shading of a pressure wire is essentially useful. Wire from the distal part of the side branch ostium, use a microcatheter. Now there was a discussion of how to equalize with regards with when you are using a microcatheter. The point is that you take the wire down, you pull out the microcatheter, and you pull out the wire so that the wire tip is just across the ostium of the side branch, but still the transducer is in the proximal part of the main branch where there is no lesion, and there you can utilize. Probably that is the only thing that I can think about. But we seldom use a microcatheter routinely, and we usually cross with the routine wire. And the standard tip weight of a FFR wire is 0.63, just like that of a BMW wire. Now, estimate the procedural safety and efficacy before you go ahead. The efficacy is best with short osteal lesions compared to long, multiple non-osteal diffuse or calcific lesions. And the procedure risk is lesser for short osteal lesions compared to other lesions. So these things should be kept in mind before you assess the FFR in a bifurcation lesion. Now, what about after the stent? Whether it is useful after a kissing balloon or whether after a side branch stent? We'll consider both the scenarios together. Now, there are hardly any studies to answer that question. Probably the sub-study of the Nordic Baltic 3, which again told us that you need to use only one stent for a bifurcation, is probably better. There was an FFR sub-study to that, which showed that by doing a final kissing balloon dilatation, you can increase the FFR and that can give durable results for up to 8 months, but that didn't improve the clinical outcomes. Now, why we have actually gone back on the use of FFR in bifurcation lesions, it's based on this study. That's the DK-CRUSH 6 trial, which is the only study available for the randomized comparison of FFR-guided and angiographic-guided professional stenting of true coronary bifurcation lesions. This trial actually included only true bifurcation lesions with a side branch of more than 2.5 millimeter diameter, and they were randomized into FFR or an angio-guided group. And what it showed, freedom from MACE at 1 year, there was no significant difference between angio and FFR group. Freedom from MI at 1 year, no significant difference. Freedom from target vessel revascularization 1 year, no significant difference. So this was actually a negative trial so far as far as the DK-CRUSH trial was concerned. So why the FFR guided strategy didn't improve outcomes in bifurcations? Myocardial ischemic burden is clinically more important than the mere presence of ischemia, and the side branch territory is always smaller than that of the main branch territory. Not all side branches with low FFR will have a clinically significant or clinically relevant ischemia. And to prove the benefit of revascularization of a side branch intervention upon medical treatment, you have to identify and treat clinically significant side branches which supply large myocardial territory before you are setting up to FFR, going up for an FFR measurement. The pinching of the ostium could be a temporary phenomenon. Either it can be due to a vascular edema, minor plaque shifts, intramural hematomas, or as a result of plaque shifts, and is prone for remodeling. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, FFR is not routinely indicated in bifurcation stenting. We should ask ourselves a few questions. Does this branch have clinical relevance? Does the stenosis cause myocardial ischemia? What's the procedural risk of an FFR? And can revascularization improve the outcomes of this patient? And I thank you for your patient listening and welcome you to the SCIP conference and the SCIP pre-conference workshop happening on October 2nd and October 3rd. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
I think there was a comprehensive talk on utility of FFR in bifurcation lesions. I think many other times when a side branch pinching is there, FFR will be useful following single stenting, which you already highlighted.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Yeah, Rajesh, nice case, very nice demonstration. I was just wondering, you put the circumflex stent into the first stent into the AV node, AV groove branch. Instead of that, if you're taken it into the OM look bigger because usually it supplies a larger territory than the AV groove branch. So if you had put the stent from the circumflex into the major OM, then if you've done the FFR on the side branch, I don't think it would have been significant because the amount of myocardium it supplies is very small compared to the major OM. In that way, I think it would have just done away with one stent. That was my thought. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a valid point, sir. But we went by angiography at that point because the tighter lesion was towards the ostium of the distal left circumflex compared to that of the OM. So we thought that if you fix that, we went by angiography to begin with. Then only we shifted it to physiology. That was the difference.
Okay. So because the OM was a very large vessel, and compared to the AV groove branch, it was a much bigger territory it was supplying. I would have put the stent. Did you think it was significant or not angiographically?
Initially, we didn't think it to be significant. We thought that we could just send it. That was the reason why sending it into the.
Okay, then it's okay.
Maybe here your pre-intervention FFR would have helped you. It was an ideal case for pre-intervention FFR.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you've done a FFR into the OM and seen, and if it was
that the OM was significant,
you could have stented into the OM.
But pre-intervention FFR doesn't predict a side branch, and neither predicts a side branch occlusion or a future.
What we are trying to say, had you done that, you would have realized that OM needed stenting for sure. And you could have taken that as the main branch. That's what we mean.
Yeah.
True. No, Rajesh,
when we have done the stenting to the from circumflex to the major OM, and invariably the side branch, when we do the FFR, it comes negative, because the basic thing is the amount of myocardium it supplies is usually very small. Invariably it comes negative. So that is my thought.
Rajesh, this equalization you said, no? For example, if you are doing not a left main bifurcation assessment, you are also doing a branch bifurcation. So where do you really do the equalization?
Sir, the problem comes when we are trying to equalize it after exchanging it across a microcatheter. So the microcatheter has already gone deep into the side branch, and you have taken your FFR wire deep into the side branch. Okay. So it's already across the ostium of the side branch.
Okay.
So the problem is where to equalize, because you have the microcatheter while we are crossing the ostium of the guide, the tip of the guide, because the microcatheter is there. We cannot otherwise take it across the microcatheter.
Okay.
So what I thought,
the microcatheter and equalize at the ostium of the side, that bifurcation.
No. What I thought was that since the transducer tip is located 30 millimeters from the tip of the guide of the pressure wire, you first cross and then pull back the wire so that the sensor is somewhere in the proximal circumflex or in the left main, and then equalize, and then while the tip of the wire is still across the ostium, so you won't have a difficulty to cross.
Okay.
Rajesh, my challenge is pulling it out. It always happens. While pulling it out, it gets stuck at the cells of the struts of the side, the main vessel stent. So as I showed the other day, again go with a smaller balloon, a 1.25 balloon, go across the lesion and then pull it out. So again, at that point of time, looking at the drift is also again challenging. Probably what you would say is come back to the left main ostium, pull back the balloon, and then keep the transducer at the bifurcation and then look for drift. That should be the ideal thing, is it?
Yeah, it should be the ideal. But sir, it has never happened, to be honest with you, because it cannot happen, because the transducer is only of the same size of the wire. It's not something that's actually projecting out. So for some strange reason, it has happened with you, probably.
No, but I think better not to jail FFR wire.
Sir, it's not jailing. It's not jailing. You stent the main vessel, you go into the side branch to do the FFR of the side branch. It's not jailing. You would never jail a FFR wire, but this is with the Aries wire that is going in through the stent struts into the side branch. Twice it has got stuck. Once I just had to pull it out. Second time I was more wiser. I went with a 1.25 balloon, went across the stent struts, and then I could take it out as a system. And the third time it didn't get stuck, but I felt that it was a jerky motion. I am not sure what exactly is happening with me.
Deepak, was it a Ox wire or a New York wire?
I'm not very sure. It could be an Ox.
Then never do it. Okay, shall we move to the next? Karna?
Sir, you're muted.
Let me just see the list, or Deepak can invite the next.
Sir, it's Dr. Rajesh Verma.
Yeah, sir. Rajesh Verma, please.
He's an aggressive interventional cardiologist, the chief operator at Aster Medicity.
Yeah, I know him from JIPMA days, so quite a good friend. Welcome, Dr. Rajesh.
Thank you very much. Let me share my presentation. Thank you, Deepak, for this opportunity. Can you see my screen now?
Yes,
very
yes.
well.
Thank you. So this was actually a very last minute presentation. So kindly excuse the defects. This was a 43-year-old lady who had risk factors of diabetes, hypertension, and dyslipidemia, with significant angina on exertion and with a very strongly positive TMT, whose ECG at rest did not show any significant changes, and echo showed a reasonably good LV function with some suggestion of a apical wall motion abnormality. This was the angiogram which showed an ostial chronic total occlusion of the LAD. You could see the distal vessel filling on the right side. No really significant disease in any of the other vessels. This was the right coronary artery which was giving significant septal collaterals to the distal LAD. You can see an epicardial collateral as well as a septal collateral. We embarked with PTCA because for one thing it was practically single vessel disease. It was not a very daunting looking CTO. And the patient herself was not very keen for surgical option. So we started with bilateral injections, bifemoral arterial approach. We delineated the CTO segment, not really very long, but not really short either. Didn't appear to have much calcium, but while doing the procedure, we felt that towards the end of the CTO segment, there was some significant calcium. We started an antegrade approach through the EBU guiding catheter with a Corsair microcatheter. Started with a Gaia second guide wire, which didn't progress much and had to be upgraded to a Concus Pro 12 guide wire, which made reasonable good progress and was about to pierce the distal cap of the CTO segment when all of a sudden she became a little agitated, had a lot of vomiting, retching, and was practically sitting up on the table. So at this point, we lost control of the wire, the microcatheter, the wire, and the LAD and the LCA guide came out. And we had to call the anesthetist, sedator, give her proton pump inhibitors, antiemetics, stabilizer, and then give a little bit of sedation. And then when we rechecked, we found to our horror that there was a big dissection at the left main. Fortunately, the small ramus and the LCX were still flowing. She was hemodynamically okay, though the pressures were borderline, maybe partly due to the sedation also. But however, with the significant dissection flap in the left main and a totally occluded ostial LAD, we didn't want to compromise the flows further, so we stopped all further antegrade injections. The next thing that we did was to quickly wire the LCX and be ready for an emergent stenting from the left main to the LCX if there were any further drops in the blood pressure or if she became unstable. Fortunately, she was holding on, and which led us to explore other options. And then we decided that if we do stent from left main to LCX, we probably do not stand much of a chance at crossing the CTO through the struts of the left main stent. And therefore, with the presence of a good collateral from the RCA, I decided that we will go and do a retrograde PCI in this patient. So on the left-hand side, you can see the microcatheter and guide wire, but that was the wrong branch. The actual branch was the one above, and you can see that with a Fielder FC guide wire and a Corsair 150 centimeter microcatheter, we could enter the septal collateral and reach the LAD, and the distal end of the wire, the Fielder FC wire, has reached a septal branch. After that, the microcatheter was tracked across and to reach the distal end of the CTO. the wire was exchanged to a Gaia second guide wire, and retrograde crossing of the CTO was attempted. The wire went partially, and then we had to again upgrade the wire to a Conquest Pro 12, which succeeded in crossing the CTO completely retrogradely. We ensured that there was another wire placed at the LED ostium just to give a direction to the wire. And then after crossing the CTO segment and reaching the LMCA, I could enter the wire, I could place the wire in the LCX also, and I could enter the anti-grade guiding catheter and make sure that the wire is now in the anti-grade guiding catheter. Trapping the wire there with the balloon, we pass the microcatheter across the CTO segment so that the microcatheter is now across the anti-grade guiding catheter. Subsequently, the wire was exchanged to RG3 330 centimeter guide wire, and over this we did serial balloon dilatation, followed by stenting with 2 stents, LED and then LMCA to LED. We did a proximal port to the LMCA to optimize the sizes. We did recross the LCX, but we did not do any kissing balloon to the LMCA bifurcation because the LCX was absolutely normal and there was no flow compromise in the LCX. So we just finished with simple LMCA to LED stenting. So she was stabilized. The donor artery in the RCA, the PDA branch, also had an intermittent stenosis, which had to be stented because the microcatheter movement at that segment had made that plaque unstable. She improved symptomatically and was discharged. We did a follow-up angiogram after 4 weeks, which showed that the dissection flap in the LMCA are almost healed. Good size vessels, good flows in the LED, good flows in the LCX. And this was the final result. The patient was asymptomatic on medical management, has subsequently come to us for follow-up for the last 3-4 years, is doing quite well. So in summary, this was a patient with an ostial LAD CTO and a PDA stenosis, which is tackled by PCI. She had left main dissection with the antegrade approach and immediate switch over to the retrograde approach with avoidance of further antegrade injections, and enabled a successful retrograde PCI to the LAD CTO and LMCA dissection with LMCA to LAD standing across a wire protected LCX. A check angio done after 4 weeks showed healing of the left main dissection flap, and currently the patient is on good follow-up and asymptomatic so far. Thank you for your patient here.
Thank you, Dr. Rajshekar. It was an excellent presentation. What was the size of the stent which you used from left main to LAD?
That is 3.5, just post-dilated to 5.5.
So how did you choose that 5.5 number? We didn't have imaging. To go to that size, you should have real guts.
No, I mean, it was more or less based on the formula of bifurcations plus the relative size as gauged by the guiding size of the guiding catheter.
See, it's a case of LAD ostial stenosis, CTO, and the left main dissection has not affected the circumflex flow. Why did the patient become restless?
The patient became restless and then had the dissection. The patient had vomiting and retching. Maybe some gastritis because of the fasting, maybe some other issues. And because of the retching and the movement of the patient in the distinct, the guiding catheter probably caused the dissection during the patient's restlessness. The restlessness was not because of the
non-cardiac cause.
Yes, yes.
So any other comments? Anybody would have done taken any other approach? See, it's a CTO, and she was living with that for quite some time, except for angina. So having seen a left main dissection, most of the time we tend to think that why can't I simply stent from left main to circumflex and leave her off now and think about LAD later. So because you said he was unstable and there is a very bad dissection appearing in the left main.
But because the circumflex flow was good.
No, and if you see the angiogram post dissection, the dissection never went into the circ. So you could have also put a small stent into the hostile left main coming to mid shaft, and you would have still been okay and would have continued the retrograde procedure in case she got unstable. That's another thought. But all well done in the end.
It was a good retrograde approach.
Nucleus.
So where do you see the role of getting a CT angio done in such type of CTO, especially when you are going for a retrograde approach? Is there any role of CT angio, or we should just try and go ahead with the antegrade, and if you are not been successful, then we can try a retrograde one?
No, there are definitely very specific indications when you do not know the course of the CTO segment. When there is a very large length of the CTO segment, when there is significant calcification of the CTO segment, these are definitely indications where a CT angiogram will help us to know the course of the vessel, the extent of the calcification, and the possible route that you should take. That holds true for both antegrade as well as retrograde approaches. Whether you go for a primary antegrade approach or a primary retrograde approach depends also on the coronary anatomy. Whenever feasible, it is easier to start with an antegrade approach because that is the one that is easier and less time consuming and probably much more friendly on the hardware and the cost. But there are some situations like absolute stump occlusion of a vessel where you do not know where you want to pierce the entry cap of the CTO. In such cases, if you have a good interventional collaterals, all collaterals need not be interventional. But if you have good interventional collaterals, then you could plan a primary retrograde procedure. You could also, most of the time now, what we have is the contemporary reverse cart approach or the modified, the newer version of the reverse cart approach, where you do an antegrade preparation, then you cross retrogradely. Neither the antegrade approach succeeds nor the retrograde approach succeeds, but you aim to meet both wires somewhere in the segment of the CTO, and then you do a reverse cut, that is, you dilate a balloon, and you try to make the retrograde wire reach that space created by the antegrade balloon. And that reverse cut approach is more likely to succeed in such an instance. This is especially true when you have a very long segment of CTO and you have good interventional collaterals. So
yeah. Thank you, Dr. Verma. And just as an extension to what you have said, would you consider that getting a myocardial viability test or a perfusion test ideally should be done before going for any CTO?
Almost always, unless you have a single vessel disease with a strongly positive TMT and symptoms which clearly correlate with the disease. Otherwise, definitely you should have a viability study. Not just a viability study, you should have a stress perfusion scintigraphy, so that you know which segment is really ischemic and how much is the viability at that point.
Yeah, that is true in the
it's a really large non-viable segment. Even if it's a very simple CTO, there's no real point in doing such a procedure.
Yeah, in this case, she was not a post-MI patient, not a LV dysfunction patient. They had a normal LV and just came for angina. So there is no need to worry or think about the viability of the area, isn't it? Exactly. Had there been LV dysfunction or post-MI patient, probably we should have confirmed the viability of that area, and hence the pros versus cons of doing the procedure or keeping under medical follow-up. So excellent presentation, Dr. Rajshekar. Shall we go to the last presentation of today's session? Can I invite Dr. Ratish Kumar?
Dr. Sridhar is not there.
Instead of Dr. Sridhar,
No.
Dr. Rajshekar Verma is presented. I think so, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's right. The same thing, with left main complication he presented. So we have Dr. Ratish Kumar. He is going to present us on complex case of ISR with imaging guidance, how he manage. Welcome, Dr. Ratish Kumar.
Thank you. Can you see my slides, sir? No.
Not yet.
It's on the way. Whenever you ask your sister whether the patient has been shifted, they will always say it's on the way. Patient may still be in the
Not at this place. Let's try again, sir. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think mine is the last presentation of this whole conference. So I think you need a lot of patience. You've been there.
But still, there are a lot of attendees who joined in.
Okay, sir. Okay. So it's going to be a very simple one after such luminaries presenting and such a wealth of experience being shared. So this is a simple case. It's got some imaging importance. That's why I'm presenting this case. So the case is a 43-year-old patient, no major coronary risk factors, presented with worsening angina of 6 months. His clinical examination was normal. Biochemical parameters are normal, ECG normal. TMT was strongly positive and he had a normal echo. So he was taken up for angio, and which revealed diffuse left main disease, including LAD, LCX, and also distal LCX. The mid LAD, T1 bifurcation, with the good target vessels, and also RCA, osteoproximal disease, with good target vessels. So he was he had a complex triple vessel disease with a high syntax score, and CABG was definitely the ideal case for him. He's a young guy without any LV dysfunction and other comorbidities, with a osteoproximal disease with good target vessels. He was referred for CABG, but he vehemently refused it for whatever reason. And after proper counseling, he was taken up for multi-vessel PCI. So the left system was addressed. LAD was pre-dilated, diagonal was dilated, LCX and left main. And then the diagonal was tended with a 2.75 into 15 Zans, and it was crushed with a balloon in the LAD using the mini crush technique. And the LAD was tended. Then after recrossing, the LAD D1 bifurcation, the final kissing balloon inflation was done. And then the LCX, distal LCX was tended, followed by the proximal LCX, which was crushed with a balloon in the left main to LAD. And subsequently, the left main to LAD, ostial left main, because it's a short left main, ostial left main to LAD was tended, overlapping with the previous LAD stent. And then after recrossing, the final kissing balloon inflation was done with 3.5 into 15 and 2.75 into 15 in the LCX. And the angiographic result was acceptable. I took a OCT run from the LAD post-procedure, so which revealed a well-opposed stent without any major complications except some areas of tissue prolapse, which we can see. Proximal LAD after the diagonal. The area was acceptable. Here there was some diagonal. And this area, we have some tissue prolapse here. You can see here. That was there, and otherwise the parameters were acceptable. The bifurcation. This was the tissue prolapsing, and this was the area which was acceptable. And RCA was tended in the next sitting. This is the imaging, which showed a well-opposed stent without any major complications. and the parameters were acceptable. So these were the parameters in the RCA. So now he came after 8 months. He had dyspnea on exertion. Clinical examination was unremarkable. Had such a complex disease, and we have stented such long stents, bifurcations, and so we had to take him up for angio anyway. To our horror, we could see that the LCX was occluded almost 99%, and the proximal LED was also having a tight lesion. This was the imaging, the LED. The distal struts were seen. The other struts were actually embedded in the neointimal hyperplasia. We could see diffuse neointimal hyperplasia, ISR, we could see. And it is there from almost distal to the proximal stent. And here, this area, it's the maximum ISR was seen. Where we had the tissue prolapse, that is the area where we had the maximum ISR. And even in left main also there was disease. So L6 was anyway occluded. And so we know that we have disease diffuse ISR from distal to proximal stent, and also the LCA ostium occluded. And RCA took a shoot, and RCA also showing almost 60% occlusion, eccentric lesion, and that was also FFR positive. So now, what could be the reason for the stent failure in our case? We thought about it. So we know that the lesion factors were already there: triple vessel disease, diffuse disease, bifurcation, ostial. Patient factors could be there. Polymer hypersensitivity could be a reason, because it could be one of the reasons, because it is a diffuse hypersensitivity. It is not just one area. It is the whole stent was having diffuse ISR. Other factors, procedural factors, yes, multiple long overlapping stents. Tissue prolapse could be one of the factors contributed to it, but there are other factors also in this case. So options are definitely CABG. This time he was convinced, because he had such diffuse disease, and there was no other option in this case, because anything will be suboptimal. Whatever you do with this such kind of diffuse ISR in all the vessels, the osteoproximal disease, rest all will be less than ideal. So this time he was convinced, and debulking followed by DEB is not an ideal option in this case, and thus definitely not an option. So as we have already seen, the major factors responsible for ISR are the patient-related, like diabetes, other factors, which was not there in this case, but yes, like maybe hypersensitive to drug or polymer could be a reason. Then lesion-related factors definitely was there, and that for that we had definitely referred for surgery initially also, but he was not keen. And procedure-related factors, most of the things were after stenting we could see that most of the things were not present, except maybe for a tissue prolapse, and otherwise expansion parameters all were normal, and malposition was also not there. Other features were not present. So pathophysiology of ISR, there are two main things, like neointimal hyperplasia, which occurs because of the vessel injury and because of the inflammatory cells. It is mainly migration of the vascular smooth muscles from the media and myofibroblast, and it is mostly seen with BMS and in the initial 3 to 6 months. And neoatherosclerosis is that because it is mostly seen with the DES, and it is due to delayed healing of the endothelium due to the durable polymer, and then the unhealthy endothelium, they uptake the circulating lipids, and it happens mainly after 9 months to 2 years. And in this case, we had mixture of both, because we had NIH as well as some amount of neoatherosclerosis, because some amount of fibrofatty plaques was also seen in our case. So this is the image of a classical neointimal hyperplasia, where you have the homogeneous consistency, the bright fibrotic shadows. And this is the neoatherosclerosis, where you have the fibrosis as well as the lipid plaques you would see here. So in our case, we had both. So diagnosis, coronary angiography definitely gives you a diagnosis, but it will not give you the mechanism and what is the future course of action, how to go about, whether we should you should use a DEB, or we should go for a stent if there is a edge, if there are factors like an edge, if there is edge restenosis or any factors, then we should be going for another stent. So that all those things will come to know only by an intravascular imaging. So this is a class 2A indication given both the guidelines. And functional assessment is important in these cases because the lesion may appear not very significant, even 50 or 60% lesion, as we already seen so much of functional assessment. So stent failure is an important indication for a functional assessment. And management in this case, balloon dilatation. In this case, our case, we don't have any much option other than surgery. But otherwise, if it is just a neointimal hyperplasia and if there is stent under expansion, we can use a balloon dilatation. And if there is neoxosclerosis, then we should use debulking modalities followed by DEB or DES if there are indications. And majority of cases we can handle with DEB only. But if there is edge stenosis, undersizing and stent fracture, then yes, then we can go for a drug-eluting stent. And tissue prolapse is a factor which we found in this case, even though it is only one of the factors when the extrusion of tissue more than 50 microns. And OCT is the best tool to detect this. And commonly noted in patients with ACS, and also you can see in about 1/4 of patients with stable angina. It is because the plaque compression and penetration of the struts into the underlying plaque, mainly seen with lipid, mainly thin cap fibroatheroma, and mostly in ACS patients at the site of ruptured plaque. It is seen mainly when you aggressively stent the small vessels and when you use longer stents. The outcome it is different in two cases. Both the different, like if it is acute coronary syndrome, it is seen at the area of culprit lesion. Well, in stable angina, it is not at the culprit lesion. It is seen where there is a maximum protrusion of the plaque. So, what is the outcome of this? One study that published by the Japanese group, they found that it is a predictor of neointimal hyperplasia at 9 months, but nothing to do with the outcome. But some other studies have shown that they are more likely to have lesion failure and stent thrombosis like that. So there's no randomized control trials on this or any other, no large studies are available on this. So learning points. So we know post-stenting imaging is very important. In our case, we have done it and we found a few factors like tissue prolapse, but otherwise rest of the features were not there. But this is very important in all cases, especially when you are going for the complex intervention like a bifurcation or a left main disease. And stent failures, OCT is a must because it will definitely help you to find out what is the mechanism of stent failure and what is the therapy that we can undertake. And apart from conventional risk factors for ISR, tissue prolapse could be an important risk factor. The clinical significance is yet to be determined. Another thing that we found that when you do such complex cases, you should regularly follow them up clinically, and at the slightest doubt, you should always go for imaging. And in this case, we could do him even though he did not have very significant symptoms. But since we followed him up closely, we could do this angio, and we could find out such critical disease, and we could act before he could have landed up in trouble. Thank you so much for your patient hearing, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh. We gave a complete, comprehensive usefulness of imaging. I think we are running short of time. So I request the organizer, Dr. Deepak, to give his concluding remarks. And I should also thank Dr. Kannan. I had some connectivity problems. Old timers like us, we have difficulty in digital equipments. So I thank you for doing most of my job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Deepak.
Sir, just a comment on this particular case. I was surprised. I was so happy to see the OCT imaging following the first angioplasty. because nowadays after we started doing OCT for the bifurcations, I always try to image and see what exactly is happening to the side branch. Now in this particular case, you actually didn't explain more regarding that, but I saw that your circumflex ostium was looking perfect. There were no links across the circumflex ostium. In fact, there were not even significant amount of struts over the circumflex. It was totally open circumflex ostium. In spite of that, you had such a malignant restenosis. I think it's something to do with the patient. That should be the reason for that. The image was looking so good. Sir, thank you so much. It's indeed my pleasant privilege to propose a vote of thanks to all of you, the most senior cardiologists from all over India, a lot of friends of mine who has joined in as moderators, expert panel, and even speakers. And also happy to inform you that just 15 minutes ago we had almost 320 participants still logging on to the sessions. So I would like to thank each and every one of you. I would also like to thank the industry partners, the USV, Torrent, and Sun Pharma. I would also like to thank the entire team, Abbott guys, who has been working with me whole throughout these days over the last two to three weeks to make this possible. I should thank at least Lijo, who is with me over here, and Ajit Sojo and the entire team Abbott who is working in Kerala for being with us and making this a successful event. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.